and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brian Ross, and this is a special report from the Law and Crime Network and for our viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Your questions about COVID-19 and the law. We've come to an end of a very difficult life, a difficult week in the life of America with thousands dying every day, hundreds of thousands of Americans infected by this virus, and now 22 million people out of work. So this has led to lots of questions about your rights, your job, your home, your finances. And to help answer those questions are two lawyers who know a lot about this, two lawyers who practice in the area of employment law. Felicia Ennis from the firm of Washaw Burstein, and Luigi Izzo from the Berman Law Group. And thank you both for joining us. And today we're getting lots of questions from people who work in the food industry, from grocery store workers to people who deliver the food to people who actually work on the farm and in meat packing plants. And Luigi, let me start by asking you, these have become the real unsung heroes during this crisis, but they have no special protections, do they?
No, not at this time. One of the things I can advise employees is that if they feel they're working in an unsafe environment and it's a reasonable danger of safety, they do have rights under OSHA to walk away to protect themselves if their employers aren't taking the right protective measures for them.
And Felicia, a question from one of our viewers who works in a grocery store and sent in this question by video.
Hi, my name is Elise. I'm an essential worker at a grocery store in New York City. I recently experienced some COVID symptoms and was sent home from work early because of them. However, my store's policy dictates that we only have to be symptom-free for 48 hours before we're supposed to return to work. So my question is, can stores be held liable for not taking sufficient safety precautions in order to keep their employees and all of the customers healthy and safe from COVID?
Felicia Ennis, how do you answer that question?
Unfortunately, there's no clear answer. What we are looking at right now is some guidances from OSHA, but nothing specific in terms of COVID enforcement in the workplace itself. I would suggest, however, that your viewer look perhaps to state or even local government for some guidance. I know in New York City, the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs has the Office of Labor Policy set up in connection with any complaints regarding workplace safety issues. And hopefully we'll be seeing some clearer guidelines from government in the coming weeks.
As you know, tonight, as Friday night in New York, under the orders from Governor Cuomo, everyone going out has to wear a face mask. But Luigi, if they don't wear a face mask, is there anything that can be done to them?
I mean, technically, no. I can't foresee a police officer in the street arresting someone in New York City because they don't have a face mask on. At this time, I think it would be imperative that everyone takes it upon themselves to do the right thing morally and wear the mask, go out. But at this point, I can't see any kind of criminal consequences or a civil fine or penalty to be enforced, especially if it was just introduced today. There would be some kind of delay period where obviously if they do see in the future over the next coming days or weeks that people aren't complying and they need to take the necessary steps to enforce it, then they would probably make a mandate as such.
And Luigi and Felicia, let me ask both of you this question. What about after this is all over? Are people who got sick because they went to the grocery store and there weren't the proper protections, do they have a valid lawsuit? Luigi?
Depending on the situation. I've heard from people from all walks of life. There are people that worked in hospitals in the beginning times, like as far back as 2 weeks ago, were told not to wear masks, complied, and now are positive with corona. Obviously, in that type of situation, you would have liability. If there's a duty and they breach that duty to protect a shopper or an employee, and because of that proximate cause, you did get the corona, yes, there would be a valid lawsuit against the employer or the supermarket or any other entity that did not comply and breach their duty. Now, the question is, what is the duty? And the duty would be different for all different levels of individuals and stores.
And Felicia, what would you say? We hate to see everyone suing everybody, but that's probably going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the issue for workplace lawsuits is a little tricky, especially to the extent that in New York, we typically deal with workers' compensation cases when you have a specific case against your employer. For grocery store workers, they're on the front lines here, and I think that they really do need more protections from the federal to the state to the local level, and hopefully that's what we're going to be seeing in the coming weeks, especially with this push from government to start reopening the economy. We really need to show that we are protecting our essential workers first before it's going to be difficult for non-essential workers to come back to the workplace.
So President Trump essentially has left it up to the governors to decide when and how to reopen the country, begin the economy again, get it going, letting stores open. In Germany, small shops are being allowed to open as of this weekend. Luigi, what do you think is going to be the consequence of opening up stores if they open them up too soon?
I think the biggest consequence if something goes wrong would be the actual mental trauma to the economy, society. The stock market would probably react in a horrible situation. I mean, even as of today, I spoke to a client. She was telling me how an 8-year-old daughter drew a picture of the world. On one side, it's a 2019, and one side said 2020. The 2019 side was blue and green, and the one in 2020 was gray and smoke. And we're talking about an 8-year-old psyche right now. So if we open up too soon and we go through this again, people would be absolutely panicking to go to work. You would have the stock market react in such a horrible way that it would probably take another year to get back on our feet.
All right, Felicia, one of our viewers a number of questions keep asking about employers who force people who are off to take vacation time during this time off. Can they do that? Lots of questions about that, Felicia.
Well, if they qualify for sick leave under the Families First Coronavirus Act, they're not supposed to be forcing their employees to first use their sick leave pursuant to the employer policy. If the employer themselves has a policy to allow workers to use sick leave that don't necessarily qualify under the federal sick or family leave acts, then it's really subject to the specific policy. I mean, I know here in New York, there are certain requirements at the state and city level, but traditionally it's left up to the employer to set the policies for sick leave.
All right. Luigi, a question. If I tested positive on my job, am I eligible for both workman's compensation and unemployment insurance?
Well, technically, you can't take both at the same time. The whole point of unemployment, when you actually file, it says, are you willing and able to work? And if you're going out on workers' comp is saying that you're unable to work. So there's a direct conflict. You absolutely cannot take both. You would have to choose. In the workers' comp situation, you would have to understand that it would have to probably be in a healthcare setting, a hospital worker, a nurse, an ambulance driver, someone that's foreseeable, and it's a foreseeable work risk. Or occupational disease is foreseeable that a nurse or a doctor would have a virus or get contaminated by an illness. But obviously, if you're a grocery worker at this time, it would be really hard to do that. But obviously, I think the law in the future, as more cases come out like that, would probably change as well. But it's going to take time for workers' comp to go that route.
And Felicia, what kinds of questions are you getting about those very issues involving unemployment and workman's comp?
I am getting a lot of questions about qualifications for unemployment if you have some issues related to COVID. I mean, there's some gray areas in terms of people who actually qualify for certain sick leave versus unemployment. Some of the furloughed workers have questions, if they still remain on their company's policies for health benefits and so forth. Do they also qualify for unemployment benefits? So there's just a whole host of questions that we're getting about the interplay between the various paid sick leave policies under the FFCRA and employer-based policies, as well as state and local.
If you're just joining us, you're watching a special report from the Law and Crime Network and for our viewers on YouTube Live and Facebook Live. COVID-19 and the law, your questions. We have two esteemed lawyers here joining us, Felicia Ennis and Luigi Izzo. And you know, lots of questions already about the food supply, which so far, other than toilet paper, everything's been available in grocery stores. But the fact is, there are now questions about whether some of the food we've been counting on will even be able to be there with the shutdown of huge numbers of meat packing plants in the Midwest. Here's a report on some of the stores and stories that we've seen this week.
A growing number of major meat processing plants are closed because of coronavirus.
COVID-19 is affecting the companies that put food on our tables as well as the employees that make that possible every single day.
One of the biggest meat packing plants in Colorado will temporarily close due to COVID-19.
So far, at least 43 JBS employees have tested positive for COVID-19. Of that number, 14 have been hospitalized and 2 workers have died.
Smithfield Foods announced the temporary closure of its facility in Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
The company shut down this plant in Sioux Falls after more than 430 employees tested positive.
Tyson, one of the world's largest meat processors, is suspending operations at one plant this week after more than 24 workers contracted COVID-19.
Meat processing plants now closed in 4 different states after employees test positive for the virus. Experts promising the food supply chain is under control, but customers are worried about empty shelves.
And that death toll continues to rise. At the JBS plant in Greeley, Colorado, now 4 workers have been their lives taken because of the coronavirus, with hundreds testing positive. One of those who died was Saul Sanchez, and I talked this week with his daughter, Beatriz Rangel.
He'd been working for JBS 30 years. 30.
Was he given any sort of protective equipment as he continued to work there during this virus epidemic?
No, he was not. No, I don't think the company was taking serious steps or were taking it seriously. That I know of, the first person that got sick was on March 5th, and we didn't even know this till my dad was in the hospital. A lot of employees started reaching out to my sister. A lot of other employees were coming into the hospital sick, and my sister was like, "What's going on?" And she started talking to some of the family members, and they said, "We have family that members that have been sick or have been tested positive, and they're telling them that they need to go to work or else they'll be fired. Even if they leave the hospital and they've tested positive, they have to show up." It's one of those places, one of those companies that you don't show up to work, you get fired.
So he faced losing his job unless he went to work, and the same for other employees. Were they given masks or any kind of protective?
No. I actually know of an employee that tried to protect themselves because this employee hands out their uniforms when they get there, and she was told to take off the mask because she's going to scare the workers there.
Your whole family must be very angry to lose your father that way.
It's been so hard, Brian. We've been trying to process the death because it was a huge loss for our family. And then we were being contacted by a lot of people and employees that loved him. I mean, I was answering the phone and people were crying and asking me about my father. And it's happened so fast, so quick, in such a short time to process that I mean, our heart aches. We just buried him yesterday. The more I look at stuff and the more I read stuff, the more angrier I get. But I think we're still in so much pain and still mourning.
Did your father ever express any concerns during this period when he had these symptoms, but was essentially told to go to work or lose his job?
No, my dad never complained. He wasn't a complainer, and my dad trusted JBS. He trusted his employer. If he was in danger, I'm sure he knew they'd probably protect them. He just trusted whatever management, I think, like a lot of employees do. They're going to take care of me.
And did they?
No, they did not take care of my dad. No, my dad, it was 78 years old. Since March 1st, or the first week in March, when they had the first positive test, which I believe was March 5th, they should have had him out of there. They should have, or given him some protective equipment, something, but they did not. I mean, he didn't get sick till March 19th. They had plenty of time. to protect him.
Well, Beatrice, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. The best to your family and to all of you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you.
Okay. And in a statement from JBS, the company says they've now closed the plant. They're doing the deep cleaning, and that when they reopen, they will take the temperatures of all workers and provide them with the masks they need and plexiglass individual barriers between workers. Although the question is raised, how can there really be social distancing in a meatpacking plant? Luigi and Felicia, let me bring you both in on this. This is a man who trusted his employer to do the right thing. That's probably true of most American workers, isn't it, Felicia?
Yeah, and this was a really tragic situation, but unfortunately, we've been hearing more and more about this. And we've also been hearing a louder chorus of protest from these workers in various industries, from their unions. And this is a real issue. I mean, we can say that maybe earlier in March, there weren't clear guidelines from the CDC in terms of wearing masks in the workplace, but the social distancing guidelines were there. Critics are now saying, but the enforcement measures aren't there. And there's really no bark and no bite there with respect to these guidelines that we keep seeing coming down from the CDC and OSHA. So the critics are really raising this to a broader audience of people saying, if you want essential workers to continue working and the non-essentials to start coming back to the workplace, we need clearer guidance and we need more enforcement measures.
And Luigi, you get a sense of frustration by so many workers. They don't know exactly who to complain to, what to do. The courts are closed. It's hard to get a hold of a lawyer at home. So what do you recommend to people who are coming up against problems in their workplace?
Well, first of all, my deepest condolences go out to that lady's family. It's a horrible situation. People, if they're trying to reach out to lawyers and they're trying to reach out, and I would say first start with your attorney general of your state. There's definitely government agencies can reach out to OSHA. Definitely, I know law firms are open remotely. A lot of law firms are working, they're up and running. People are working from home. It's a whole new world. Things have been changed around. We're constantly at the Berman Law Group. We're in multiple states and receiving phone calls daily, probably more than ever. So keep trying, get out there. Definitely make sure if you feel that something was done to you, immediately do so, because there are statutes of limitations for these things. Sometimes they're 30 days, sometimes they're 90 days. And if you wait for this all to blow over, you might find out that your statute has gone a long time ago and there'll be no recourse. So do not wait because you feel frustrated. Do your due diligence, reach out to people and ask for the help that you think that you deserve.
Felicia, one question for you. Can the company use the furloughs and the layoffs to permanently get rid of people they don't like when they start to rehire?
Well, that's a good question, Brian, but furloughs and layoffs related to the COVID-19 pandemic are one thing. To the extent that they want to make these layoffs more permanent and go into the next phase, if they choose to do that with certain employees, they still have to comply with certain standards and requirements. That the choice of permanent layoffs for employees are done without discrimination. And there's a legitimate business reason for the company's action in this environment.
But Felicia, are you concerned that when there's some return to normality, the courts will be so clogged and everyone will be so jammed up that it'll be very hard to pursue a case like that?
I see the courts starting to open up to more civil action. So I'm optimistic that when people do start going back to work, and if there are these claims, we will have resources available for them. And I know at my firm, we're certainly working on assisting employees and also assisting employers in developing plans to help employees coming back into the workplace. I think it's very important to have clear guidelines, to have transparency. Otherwise, as Luigi said, there's going to be a lot of panic out there.
Right. And Luigi, what rights do workers have when the furloughs go away and they come back to work? They'll be thankful for a job. Do you think employers are likely to take advantage of that?
Well, we hope not. as we see with the pork plant, I mean, if they would have just did the right thing in the beginning, they wouldn't have to shut down for deep cleaning. I'm sure it's costing them millions and millions of dollars being closed and then restructuring. If the employers do the right thing, follow the rules, and do actual keeping distance and giving, I'm sure they're going to still be giving out masks and giving protective gear even when everything starts to open, and maintain of some state of safety, we should be able to get out of this in a slow pace and come back to normal. If they don't and they continue to do the wrong thing, they're going to end up closing. They're going to lose millions of dollars. Employees are not going to return to work, and we're going to continue in this state. So it's going to really be left up to the companies and these big corporations to actually put their foot forward, do the right thing, have employees get back to work in a safe environment. Let's get to some sense of normality and try to get the country moving forward.
All right. And Felicia, this really is going to require a rewrite, isn't it, of all the health and safety, the OSHA rules?
Certainly with respect to OSHA, I mean, we're still waiting for some regulations concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's been a lot of criticism out there with OSHA in terms of their slow reaction to what's been going on in the workplace environment. So we're hoping to see those changes come a little bit more quickly now.
All right. Well, Felicia Ennis, the firm at Walsall Burstein, thank you so much for joining us today. And Luigi Izzu from the Berman Law Group, also thank you so much. Great answers for important questions, and we'll continue to take your questions. So Jesse Weber will be here on Monday at this time. We'll be back next Tuesday with more of our special reports. I'm Brian Ross from the Law and Crime Network. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.